Hello, my awesome project managers. Many of you have heard me say get certified as a PSM after the PMP. So I'm here with one of my awesome alumni, and we're talking about the PSM exam, and I really want to make sure that she gets the full understanding of what is required for this test. So tip one, read the Scrum Guide to the point of extreme mastery. Extreme mastery. The key word is extreme. If you don't know the Scrum Guide inside out, you could have issues on the exam. So please read the Scrum Guide to the point of extreme mastery. Every single line, nook and cranny. Make sure you got good control over it. Remember, it's just 13 pages. So spending some time on hammering down that Scrum Guide is really going to help you. Tip number two, practice the Scrum Open exam to the max. Take it multiple times and take it till you get 100%. In my mind, at least 3 times. Tip number 3, practice the Product Owner Open. Practice the Product Owner Open exam because there are things you learn about the product owner that you may not learn in the Scrum Open. And practice it again, in my mind, till you get 100 on the Open exam 3 times. Tip number 4, pay specific attention to the values of Scrum. Know your Scrum psychology. When we talk about the values, you got to know why you're doing what you're doing and the right mindset to have. Those values are not talked about the way they are talked about on Ken's site, the same way in the Scrum Guide. In fact, the Scrum Guide doesn't have as much emphasis as Ken's site does. So if you haven't seen those values, there's a very notable image you can find on Google. Just Google Scrum Values, and it's going to come up with an image that is very, very well known in Agile circles. It's from Ken's site, scrum.org. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to that page right now. So it's got a page dedicated to it. There it is. If you scroll down, see that image? Courage to do the right thing, focusing on the right stuff that the team is working, commitment to achieving the goals of the Scrum team, respect of your team members, and openness. Courage, focus, commitment, respect, openness. And there's some other content here that you can read. To better understand it, I would highly advise this to anyone taking the exam. Know the values of Scrum. Okay, moving forward, number 5, read the insightful articles on scrum.org. There are a bunch of insightful articles. If you go to scrum.org/forum/Scrum Forum, there's some articles there that you may find useful as you study for the exam. I would recommend those as well. I would highly recommend as well the Scrum Glossary. So I'm going to get this link and open it up so that we can see together what is in here. So let's go to Scrum Glossary, open up Ken's site. There we go. And right here. All right, Scrum Glossary, Glossary of Scrum Terms. Scroll down and there you go. It starts off B, burn down chart, burn up chart, coherence, daily, definition of done, developer. And it's not a whole lot of stuff, but if you know your Scrum definitions, this could help you because some of these topics could very well be on the exam, and knowing what the glossary says is only going to help you the more. All right, moving on to tip number 7. Keep your eye on the clock. It's crazy. You got about 45 seconds per question. Time really flies. For me, I spent a minute on each question, and therefore, out of 80 questions, I had 50 questions left when I was 30 minutes left. Think about that. So if I had 30 questions left, and I had 50 questions left and 30 minutes left, it was a race against time. So you got to keep your eye on the clock and you got to practice it. Okay, here's the next tip. Do not be tempted to do the test open book. A lot of people say, oh, it's open book. You can do these tests open book. I wouldn't advise opening the Scrum Guide looking for answers, because you're going to end up wasting time. You're going to end up wasting so much time that you may get into panic mode and you're just answering at random when you got the last 20, 30 minutes. Don't do that. Don't even open the book. Don't open any book. Just know the content to the best of your ability and rely on intuition. My next tip is watch videos from reliable sources. So the stuff you did for ACP, leave that by the wayside. Stuff you did for PMP, it could help you. Yes, I know, it could. But kind of leave those by the wayside. And I would really recommend looking at Ken's material for this exam. For me, I spent more time knowing the manifesto values and the principles, understanding them. And when I needed to take the exam, it was easy for me because I had a very good base of understanding the Agile Manifesto values and principles. And then I would also recommend, like I said, watch videos from reliable sources. Don't focus on ACP and PMP and all that stuff, because you may very well find out that there's different language, different lingo in the ACP stuff, the Agile Practice Guide versus the Scrum Guide. Scrum Guide is really what you want to focus on, okay? All right, now with that said, we're just going to spend a little bit of time going over some of the major topics for the exam. So I'm going to be writing out these major topics, and we're going to be covering them together. So let's go to my whiteboard here really quick. All right, so here, the very first one is coaching and mentoring. Coach and mentor. Did you know that this is your role? This is part of what you're supposed to be doing as a Scrum Master. So in the organization as a whole, this is one of the things that you're meant to be thinking about, not just in the world of the team, but in the entire organization. Your role as coach and mentor is front and center. Coach the team, mentor them in good practices, help them to understand how best to practice Scrum. That's one of the things you're meant to do. So that's number one, all right? Number two. Number two is understanding the concept of a self-managing team. So in the Agile Manifesto, when it says, give them the environment and trust they need and trust them to get the job done, trust them, right? So if you trust them, they can manage themselves, they can do what they need to do to self-arrange and self-lead and self-coordinate. So you got to remember that. Self-managing team is a major hallmark in the world of Agile and, of course, Scrum. The next thing you really want to focus on is know your artifacts. And don't just know them on the surface. I mean, really going into your Scrum Guide and knowing the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment, right? Some people would say PSI. They don't call it that anymore. It's just the increment in the Scrum Guide. So know your artifacts. Next, you got to know your Scrum team inside out. And you got to know who does what. So I would say, when we talk about the configuration of the 353, you got to know your product owner, you got to know your Scrum Master, and you got to know the developers. And then you need to know what each one is responsible for and what each one is accountable for. Now, if you haven't spent time doing this, I want to call your attention to it more as I go through this with you. So let's go to scrumguides.org and let's jump into that page real quick. All right, so right here, you read it online. Let's go to the role. So we've got developers. So you can see developers are the people that are committed to creating any aspect of usable increment, blah, blah, blah. But then it says developers are always accountable for, watch these, you got to know what they're accountable for. You see what I'm saying? Because for every one of these roles, there's things that they may be responsible for and things they may be accountable for. So always accountable for these things. See that? All these things here, that's what they're accountable for. See that? All right. You also see for the product owner is accountable for effective product backlog management, developing and explicitly communicating the product goal, creating and clearly communicating product backlog items, ordering the product backlog items, and ensuring that the product backlog is transparent, visible, and understood. You got to know this really well to know, okay, what is this role accountable for and what is that role accountable for? Now let's take a look. You see the language is very specific. You know, when it talks about accountability, it says the Scrum Master is accountable for establishing Scrum as defined in the Scrum Guide. So if people are not practicing Scrum the right way, it's a job of the Scrum Master to educate those individuals. You got to keep that in mind. All right. So just knowing what each person on the team does, right? Product owner, Scrum Master, and developers is very important. All right, moving on to the next one. The next one is number 5. And this is Scrum Values. And we've already talked about the Scrum Values. This is just a general reminder, you know. CFOs respect courage. Now, that statement helps you cram them a little bit, right? Because respect and courage are the last two. I just have a funny mnemonic. CFOs respect courage. People who are courageous to say they need more money. It's just a funny play on words. But the openness, right? That's O. The F is for focus, and the C is for commitment. So you've got commitment, focus, openness, respect, and courage. So you got to know them as well as possible. All right, so that's the values. Now, when we talk about number 6, the DOD, this is big, the definition of done. So going into this exam, you got to understand what done means, right? And again, if you go back to the mothership, like I say, it's the mothership, the definition of done, right? You hear done being talked about a number of times. Instilling quality by adhering to a definition of done. Let's see where else done is. Done is mentioned. Okay, so here's a commitment, definition of done. They got a whole section on done. So before you exam, make sure you read this. The definition of done is a formal description of the state of the increment where it meets the quality measures required for the product. You see the language is specific to the increment. There's a difference between done in Scrum when we say increment versus when we say acceptance criteria for a story, should that whole dialogue ever come up. Done is for an increment, all right? And done just means it meets the quality measures required for the product. I would highly advise reading everything that you've got in the definition of done. All right, next thing that we have here is the concept of product backlog management. Product backlog management, you got to understand how it's done. So even though it's not explicitly said that there's a ceremony or an event is the right word, right? There's an unspoken event called backlog refinement. But in the world of Scrum, it's not a mandatory event. You got to remember, it's not mandatory, but it's something that should be happening. And product backlog management is a job of the product owner. The product backlog should be managed, prioritized. You're going to be breaking down epics into smaller pieces. And just remember, when I say epics, this terminology is not in the Scrum Guide. So you're breaking down bigger requirements or bigger requests into smaller pieces. That is really what you're doing in this world. So you will not find the word requirement in the Scrum Guide, but if you go to the product backlog to understand what's in it, it said the product backlog is an emergent ordered list. Let's go there so you can see it. There's some subtleties. An emergent ordered list of what is needed to improve the product. You see, it's a list of what is needed to improve the product. You could also think about it as a list of what you need to do as far as the product is concerned, right? But you got to remember that it's a job of the product owner for sure. All right, let's move on to the concept of empiricism. Number 8, empiricism. So what you're going to find in the Scrum Guide is Scrum is founded on empiricism. And I'm going to quote that exact piece. It says, let me actually mention the very first place that you find empiricism in the Scrum Guide. All right, it says, under Scrum theory, let's go there real quick. It says Scrum is founded on empiricism and lean thinking. Empiricism asserts that knowledge comes from experience and making decisions based on what is observed. Lean thinking reduces waste and focuses on the essentials. And then it says, these events work because they implement the empirical Scrum pillars. It's talking about inspection and adaptation. So when you boil it down, empiricism just means you're learning from real experience. You are incorporating it back into the process. You're learning again, incorporating it back. And I would say pay close attention to the areas where you find the word empiricism or empirical and things like that. See that again? Helping employees and stakeholders understand and enact an empirical approach for complex work. See that again? While proven useful, these things, burn ups, burn downs, cumulative flows, do not replace the importance of empiricism. So again, empiricism, just following what you're doing, paying attention to it, learning from it, and pivoting accordingly. That's really what that is. So that's number 8. All right, we're almost done here. The next one is a very straightforward one. This is number 9, and this is facilitation. And what is facilitation? Facilitation just means the ability to guide the team to a desired outcome or whatever outcome they get to. It could be a desired outcome. It could be an outcome that you didn't know about previously, but we could be facilitating the different events. You know, we call them events now. They used to be called ceremonies. Now we call them events. So that you'll see the word facilitation being used where the Scrum Master is concerned. Let's go very quickly. Take a look. So it says facilitating stakeholder collaboration as requested or needed. See that? And that pretty much is where the word facilitation begins and ends. There's not very much more, but I do want to say though, that facilitation goes beyond what the Scrum Master does. The team should also be able to facilitate anything at any time. A team member, the developers, they should be able to facilitate their own daily scrums. They should be able to facilitate a retrospective, facilitate anything. Typically, we look at the product owner as a person who may facilitate the sprint review. So let's go to sprint review real quick and just read. It says, the purpose of sprint review is to inspect the outcome of the sprint and determine future adaptations. Let's see, the Scrum team presents the results of their work to key stakeholders and progress towards the product goal is discussed. During the event, the Scrum team and stakeholders review what was accomplished in the sprint and what has changed in the environment. Based on this information, attendees collaborate on what to do next. Product backlog may also be adjusted to meet new opportunities. So you see there are little subtleties about things that happen in these meetings. Well, all of these things are facilitated, and it doesn't have to be the Scrum Master facilitating everything. It doesn't have to be a product owner that facilitates the sprint review, although you would typically expect, because they know what's happening in the business, they're bringing in other stakeholders that they know from the business to be part of that sprint review. So typically it would be the product owner that you could expect to do that. Doesn't have to be though, could be anyone. Anyone on the team who is capable should be able to do that. All right, moving on to number 10. Number 10 is stakeholders and customers. So what do we need to know about this? The Agile Manifesto says business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. So think about that. Stakeholders are people that the project could affect, or people that could be affected by the project, people who could affect the project or be affected by the project. And then customers. Your customers are pretty much stakeholders. But when we look at stakeholders, we also think about end users and people who have some connection to the project, but are not necessarily part of the Scrum team. The next one is events. Let's talk about events. That's 11. And when we talk about events, in the world of Scrum, we have 3 events, or 5 events, I beg your pardon, 5 formal events. So we have the sprint itself. You need to remember the sprint is a container. So look at the sprint as a container, right? And within that container, you've got sprint planning as an event. You've got the daily Scrum as an event. You've got the sprint review as an event, and you've got the sprint retrospective as an event. And look, they're all contained in the sprint. So the sprint is one event that is a container for all the other events. And that's how you need to look at it and know the tiny little things that, that happen in each one. So again, my advice, my friendly advice, and I know I've taken more than enough of your time, I'm sorry. But going over here, when it comes to the events, we can see the events down here. Know your events inside out. Know them really well. There's so many tiny little intricacies and quirks in Scrum that is different from other frameworks, even in the world of Agile. You got to pay close attention to those tiny little minutiae, because those could come back to bite you in a question. It could be there as a clue, and you need to be able to observe, okay, what exactly is this saying? All right, moving back into our last few for this. So we're done with events. Know your events. And also remember, backlog refinement is not a formal event, but it's something that is still done. All right. So moving on here, we got our final one. And I believe this is our final one, right? This is product value. Let's go there. Number 12. Number 12, product value. So the key thing to remember here is that we are working on this because we believe it is of value. If it's not of value, we shouldn't be working on it, right? Working on the right thing is very important. Otherwise, you're not going to get value at any level. You're just going to get busy work, and you're going to get something that no one uses. So you find the word value appearing kind of early in this whole thing. So let me take you again to the Scrum Guide very quickly here. It says, Scrum is simple. Try it as is and determine its philosophy, theory, and structure. Help to achieve goals and create value. You see that? And even earlier on, it says, the Scrum team turns a selection of the work into an increment of, again, that word value. And up here, Scrum is a lightweight framework that helps people, teams, and organizations to generate value through adaptive solutions for complex problems. That's your goal, value, right? It says artifacts that have low transparency could lead to decisions that diminish value and increase risks, and things like that. So wherever it's talking about value as it pertains to a product or value the team is delivering is very important. If it doesn't offer value, we shouldn't be doing it. That's the mindset. We only want to do things that are valuable. We want to cut out the crud, cut out the fat. Okay, and that, my friends, is pretty much it. And I want to give a big thank you to our friend Caroline, who joined me on the journey. And here we go. So Caroline, have you got any questions about this? We all good?
Thank you so much. This narrows everything down because there's so much information out there.
There is
that you could end up going down a rabbit hole.
Absolutely. Okay, Caroline, I'm glad we could do this. Thank you very much for giving me your time. I'm going to stop the recording. And if you found this to be useful, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, share with your friends.